Hello and welcome to this evening's webinar, How to Make Money from Your Music. This is our fourth and final webinar in a series of ISM Trust and Delic sessions where panels of industry experts discuss current issues for musicians and explore how we might find a solution to overcome these challenges, focusing on tools, skills and strategies to help music creators succeed. The ISM Trust is the Incorporated Society of Musicians' sister charity and works to ensure that all music professionals in the UK can reach their full potential by creating pioneering resources. You can find out more about the ISM Trust and Delic by following the links in the chat box. Before I hand over to Vic and our panelists for today, I have a few technical points for you. If you experience any technical difficulties, such as sound quality issues, please let us know in the chat box and we'll attempt to resolve the issue. Subtitles are available if you wish to enable or disable them by selecting the live caption option at the bottom of the screen. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on the ISM Trust's website at ismtrust.org/webinars, as well as on our YouTube channel and the Delic website. If you have any questions, please let us know in the questions box and we'll endeavour to answer as many of them as possible at the end. You can also join the conversation online by using the hashtag ISMxDelic. Now, without further ado, I will hand over to Vic and our panelists, and I hope you enjoy today's webinar.
Thank you, Maria. Yes, hello, welcome to the ISM Trust / Delic sessions, the fourth in the series. It's lovely to be here. My name is Vic Galloway. I'm a BBC broadcaster. I'm a music author. I'm a musician, journalist, general music nerd who managed to turn his teenage hobby into his job, and I'm delighted about that. And we have four expert panelists to speak to today. What we're going to do is I'll quickly give them an introduction. They're going to chat about themselves as well quickly, and then we'll get into the conversation. As we go along, if you have any questions or points you'd like to make, please drop them in the chat box or the Q&A box, and we'll come to them towards the end of the session. So we're going to go roughly for about an hour. So about 15 minutes towards the end, we'll start coming to your questions. I seem to have gone a kind of strange blue color. I'm not sure why, but I quite like it. Okay, let's go. So today we are exploring ways to make money, how to make money from your music. Today we're exploring how musicians and music creators can make money from their music. Obviously there's streaming, that's a huge percentage of people's income. Live revenue is there as well. But nowadays, artists, musicians, music creators need portfolio careers. They need to manage multiple revenue streams to build a career. So how do they do that? They need publishing, session work, teaching, sponsorship, merchandise. They've got to kind of think of themselves as small entrepreneur businesses, and they may need 4 or 5 different streams and different income streams to get their career off the ground. And joining us to talk about all these different income streams and various other things as well are my panelists. Sandra Croft, Promotions and Artist Relations Representative for CD Baby in the UK and EU. Welcome, Sandra. G. Linford Grayson, who works with creative partnerships at Patreon UK and Ireland. G, the OG, nice to see you. Mike Burgess, who is an ISM Trust advisor, a creative and educator. Hello, Mike. And CEO at Delic himself. We love him, we know him, we see him in almost every Delic session. John Maxwell Hobbs, ladies and gentlemen, make some noise. Right. That's a good introduction. Sandra, tell us a bit about yourself. What do you do, and how did you get there, and what's your kind of working week like, and so on?
So, hi everyone. I work at CD Baby. I'm the Promotions and Artist Relations Representative handling the UK and EU markets. And what that means is I help artists with their digital strategy, their release strategy. Like I pitch to DSPs, I do analytics to try and figure out how songs are doing, and just general all-around help that we give out artists at CD Baby about, like, you know, how to just maximize their releases and run efficient and like resource-wise release campaigns, and also how to target their fans in the streaming context. I've been working in distribution for about 6 years now, and before that I was a publicist. working in PR for 5 years. And before that, I worked in artist management. So I've kind of like, you know, been through several different like sectors of the music industry. And it's really, you know, we've seen things change a lot in 10 years, just, you know, even from the downloads era to even how music is consumed. So it's been really interesting tracking those changes. And in many ways, like, you know, things have never been as good as they are now for independent artists, and they have the most amount of opportunities available to them. So it's really exciting to be here and to hear more about what everyone has to say about that.
Thank you, Sandra. Yeah, you're going to be able to bring us loads of different perspectives. So looking forward to hearing some of your opinions in a wee while. G, tell us about yourself. Tell us about what you do week in, week out, and how you got there, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. Hi. So good to be here. Absolutely love the topic of this discussion. I'm really excited to get into it a bit more. So my name's G. I look after creative partnerships for Patreon in the UK and Ireland. So Patreon, in case you're not already familiar, if you have like kind of a vague idea, Patreon is a membership platform where creators can offer bonus content and a closer connection to their fans. In exchange, fans pay a monthly membership fee, which then goes to the creator and basically forms a sustainable source of income. They can predict month on month. They can invest, whether that is in a professional sense or in a personal sense. The idea, we were founded by a musician who called Jack Conti, who's in a couple of bands, and he, back in like 2013, he was making videos on YouTube that were getting millions and millions of hits. He's spending all of his savings on them, but he wasn't even breaking even on the investment he'd made. And so he basically wanted to create a sustainable and fair way for artists to monetize their audiences. And we have grown massively since then. We have over 200,000 creators. We've paid out over $2 billion to creators, 1 billion of which was last year. During the pandemic, particularly, we paid out £50 million in the UK and Ireland. So the growth has been very huge, and it's been a great place to be a part of, working with artists directly to help them achieve their goals when it comes to like monetizing their audiences. And yeah, I'm really excited to hear questions and discuss further.
Cool, thank you, G. Yeah, I think Patreon will feature fairly heavily in this discussion, to be honest. I think it's definitely one of the keys to for artists to make money nowadays, you know, with the entire world going online. Mike, tell us a bit about what you do at the ISM Trust.
Okay, so I've got two hats, I guess, in this conversation. So I work with the ISM as their independent legal advisor as part of their team. So I support their near 11,000 members across the world with legal inquiries that come in relation specifically to copyright related matters. So I specifically deal with management contracts, recording contracts, publishing contracts, all of that kind of stuff. The stuff that really needs a second set of eyes to look at it before you sign anything. So I deal with that stuff for the ISM. In a private capacity as well, away from the ISM, I also run a service called Sound with Mike, which is a similar type of thing. But I also offer product development, strategic advice, marketing, artist development type stuff as well. Having had a background as an artist in the electronic music world and toured as a DJ and a performer and done all of that stuff when I was a bit younger. So I've got quite an interesting sort of, you know, I've had sort of 10 years of developing artists, and I think that'll link in with some of what Sandra is probably going to say. And I'm sure, again, same with John, and bits of my world, again, will cross over with what G does in respect of trying to create sustainable futures for artists and actually trying to ensure that we do, you know, put artists in a, you know, in a way which is sustainable.
Sure. Okay. I think you've frozen
there.
Not
be too much of an emergency.
Sorry, you froze there slightly. Did he freeze for everyone else or just me? That's the thing about the internet. Anyway, brilliant perspectives, Mike. It'll be good to hear your perspective as an artist as well. And when you were saying when you were younger, I can't believe it. You look so young now. I mean, how much younger were you? Okay, Mike, thank you. John, as I say, make some noise for John Maxwell Hobbs. He's in the house. Tell us a bit about Delic, because it's a massive thank you to the ISM Trust and Delic for putting these sessions together. So tell us, what is Delic and what was your journey to get there?
Well, Delic is a tool to manage the process of creating. We've got a lot of tools out there to do the creating, recording, editing, and really interesting ways of distributing that. But in between, it's a mess. You have to sort of manage it yourself. You have to run all sorts of spreadsheets. You have to figure out how to get files from your system to someone else, make sure that they get the right files, keep track of whether they've contributed what they need to, and all of that. So basically, we handle task management, asset management, rights management, just that whole sort of middle piece that a lot of people need help with. So you can do that with Delic, which is great. Now, I came to that, let's say, in a search to figure out how to make money for myself from music as well. And I've done all sorts of things. I'm a musician. I've also worked in technology. My day job was as an executive for the BBC. So that's one aspect of a day job. But I've done other things as well. I've been a road manager. I've been a sound engineer. I've been a guitar tech, a whole range of things. Fueled airplanes once. Summer, so those sorts of things. So I'll be interested to hear everybody's journey and then talk about how to move in your own journey as well.
Brilliant, yeah. And as the artist does become more of a business person or an entrepreneur, organization and being on top of all of your assets, as you were saying, and managing everything is more important than ever. Let's start then. A portfolio of work. Sandra, what does that actually mean? I mean, people have to diversify now. Musicians, artists have to diversify. They can't just make tunes and expect everything to fall into place around them, can they?
No, I mean, the short answer is no, really, because there's all kinds of factors, that determine how, people discover artists. And, I think in the current kind of rate of streaming, it just seems to me that fans are really important to, you can have a PR, you can have a radio plugger, but ultimately fans is what contributes to the long-term sustainability of your project, people who support you and go to your shows and who, more importantly, tell other people about you. And I think having a portfolio means just you obviously have your songs that you create your artistic work, but I think it's also important to think about other ways in which to monetize your music through things like publishing royalties and sync and merch, kind of what G does, direct to fan, monetizing direct to fan contact, and to do that, you have to have fans. So I think it's really important to think about, as an independent musician, for example, it's really important to think about who your music appeals to and what similar artists like yours, and always be thinking about that context beyond your music, beyond making music, in a sense, artists have to be these all-round entrepreneurs. You can't just make music and sign to the label and hope there's tools at the next step. The best way to kind of, as an independent artist starting out, or even if you want to maintain control of your catalog, is to educate yourself about the facets of the music industry and keep making contacts and find ways to push your music, not just in direct streams, people streaming your music on Spotify, but through other avenues in which you can reach people who might not originally be a part of your fan base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of artists and musicians will shudder at the thought of having to become a businessman. How would you sort of turn that on its head, Mike? I mean, if you were going to advise an artist who was like, oh, I don't want to have to sell my stuff. Yeah. I don't want to be a business guy. I'm an artist. I mean, how do you flip that?
I mean, the short way of putting it is tough. The climate, the market is, we have these statistics flying around, 20,000 tracks a day being uploaded to Spotify. I think that's actually doubled. I think recently, I think the latest stat I saw was around 40K tracks a day being uploaded to Spotify. It's a very hectic digital market. So I think, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but this idea of if we're just looking at the digital market, then you have a huge amount of noise that you're fighting against in the same way you are with algorithms on social media. So it's really then about, well, what are the differentiating factors between you and other artists in the same genre and the same subgenre as you? And how do we create that differentiation? And is that through brand? Is that through marketing? Is that through music? There's multiple different things that need consideration. So the short answer is sadly, and I say it with, respect, sadly, tough, that's where the market is at the moment. So, it's tricky, but again, as I said, I'm sure we'll talk about the sort of the Patreon and physical product and merch and those things as we go through the conversation. But this is where those things start to factor in as an artist profile starts to grow, as even a small amount of fans start circulating around an artist. I mean, I'm talking like 50, 50 fans that, it's the age old thing of if you can get 50 people to buy everything that you put out, whether that's physical music, whether that's merch, whether that's, and we'll again get into the cheap to produce merch conversation in a little bit as well, where actually there's maybe a bit more of a margin profit wise as well. So yeah.
So if we're talking about marketing, I mean, that immediately says big bucks to me. That's, so you're an emerging artist, you have perhaps your music ready, it's ready to go, it sounds great, it's mastered, you've done everything, you perhaps got artwork, you've maybe even got videos, you've got content connected to it, you've got everything ready to go, but you're one of those 20,000, 40,000 artists uploading your material to the internet. And how do you market it and try and zone in on a new audience, on any kind of audience? Maybe you don't even have a single fan yet, or maybe you've only got 2 or 3 mates that listen to your tunes. How do you do that on a budget? I mean, Sandra, give us your opinion on that, because I think you probably deal with that on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I mean, I think like ultimately when you think about budgets and, when we enter that realm, it comes down a lot to something I like to call resource management, as an artist, like taking stock of what your resources, whether it's money, whether that's time. And I think, it's kind of like the first thing that any of us do when we find a new artist is like, social media. And I often go to Instagram and check them out and see what they're like, to get another facet of them beyond their songs. So I think that's one element of it, kind of like, and there's a whole discussion about how do you use social media to promote yourself. That's like an entire panel in itself. But I think, having something captivating and not just having your social media be like, hey, come and stream my song, or, people want to find an element. They want a kind of connection to this artist, like a real human connection, like, whether it's visual, whether it's something you say, whether it's, and I think you have to kind of like give something, you have to think about why people would engage with your music. And like Mike says, that could come down to 50 people. You don't have to think in a vast scale. I think, sometimes like, I just think like 10 diehard fans, are like sometimes, depending on the artist, worth more to them than like 100,000 monthly listeners, because they're 10 very engaged people. And very engaged people don't just keep it to themselves. They hunger to tell other people, and those recommendations are worth a lot. So I think when you think about your fan strategy, you have to think just on the small scale and think about how you can broaden it out. Like, I think if you start to think of something too vast or too complicated, or something that's not within your means, or you feel that you can't carry out that action easily, it's not easy to start that process. So the answer is it varies enormously based on what kind of artist you are and who your fans are, but how you reach out to them is just something that should feel authentic and should feel like in line with, the music you make and the aesthetic that you want to project as an artist.
John, how do you feel about marketing or self-marketing your own music through whatever platform, and taking your art and seeing it as a product? Is it an essential thing to do?
That all depends on what your aim is. If you want to make money off of your music, then yeah, you do have to market it. You don't, if you have a shop, you don't hide, behind a wall and don't let anybody know that it's there. You have to get it out there for people to know. And you can do it in ways that doesn't necessarily compromise your artistic vision, if that were, make it part of the thing. I mean, look at the KLM, for example, who were like completely anti-commercial, but really, really good at marketing themselves. So much so that, they had £1 million that they didn't know what to do with. So they set it on fire in a bothy up on the west coast of Scotland, which actually was really good marketing and made them even more money. So, if you want to make money, you have to sell yourself. You really do.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's funny with the KLF. A friend of mine lives on the Isle of Jura and actually swept out that bothy, and he said that there were 50 and £100 notes, sort of half charred. And he sort of witnessed the whole spectacle. But as you say, an incredible marketing plan. G, bringing you in here. If an artist just starting and they initially want to start building a following online, I mean, especially with a view to eventually making some income out of that following, what would be the first steps that you would take?
Oh, I mean, in terms of like getting started, I think trying to get yourself as many places as possible. I mean, when it comes to like the Patreon perspective, focusing on like also building that engagement and building that conversation with your followers, not just looking at like the numbers and aiming for, you know, huge amounts of followers, but actually how can you make your followers and your fans feel more connected to what you're doing? Because in the long term, that's how you will get them to come with you from platform to platform. But also, like, if you're looking to monetize through a membership, it really is about that like core fandom who really believes in everything you do and is excited about what you do, who wants to be closer to the process. And it's not always the artists who have hundreds of thousands of followers who do the best on membership. It's often the ones who from the get-go have involved their fans in the process, in their work, have been transparent with them. And I know that's not for everyone. I think for some people, like having that boundary is hugely important. But I think if you are looking to particularly monetize that audience down the line, it's something you want to be thinking about from the very beginning, like building communities, doing meetups, sharing extra pieces of content with your fans. That's something to consider.
Well, and we'll get into actually what Patreon does in just a minute or two, but I'm just sort of thinking about people just right at the beginning of their careers and the beginning of them putting their music and their art out there. It's I suppose you're trying to, I love this concept and this idea and what you're all saying here, which is quality rather than quantity. 10, you know, dedicated fans or 50 dedicated fans is better than 1,000 sort of, you know, one click, one listen kind of, you know, passes by. But if you were trying to attract those initial first 10, 50, 100 fans, how do you do that? Is it what I've seen a lot of these of platforms popping up that are kind of saying, if you give us some money, we'll put your art in front of some influencers on Instagram and TikTok and various other platforms, and they'll hear your music or see your art or whatever it may be that you're promoting, and they'll sort of push it out there, possibly. Mike, have you seen any of these initiatives?
Yeah, of course. I mean, my Instagram feed is full of companies claiming to be able to get your music in front of this, that, and the other. I mean, I think, again, this isn't something overly new. I think we've been seeing this sort of thing. Wherever there's an opportunity, people like this tend to pop up, and, you know, fair enough, they're seeing an opportunity and that's what they think. Some of these things are legitimate, some of them aren't. It's about as short an answer as I can give you. And obviously that makes it difficult to determine who is legitimate and who is not. I mean, something that I would always get people to try and think about is, you know, you're never going to see a radio plugger advertising their services on Instagram, you know, because radio pluggers are known word of mouth by and large. If you want to engage a radio plugger, by and large, they're not promoting their wares. They're a well-respected individual or a well-respected company that people know of through word of mouth, and eventually by asking other artists, who did you use to market your single to radio, or who did you use to market your album to radio, names start to come up. So I would always sort of have some hesitation about these companies that are directly marketing to you through email, through social, wherever that is, that are claiming to be able to put your music in front of X amount of playlisters, influencers, etc. Because ultimately, my personal opinion is that the people are actually out there doing the work, that are getting music in front of the right editorial people at playlists, the DSPs, etc. On the whole, those people try and keep a pretty low profile in my experience. You know, I have relationships with people at Spotify, Apple Music, etc., and they're not out there, you know, it's difficult to find their name, let alone kind of what their role is, and that you can suddenly just pay an amount of money to a third party, and that third party can put their music in front of you.
Well, that's interesting. Just briefly then, how would emerging artists, you know, artists who are ambitious, that do want to connect with the right people and do believe they've got something, how do they find these? I mean, you can find radio pluggers. I mean, I work in radio, and if an artist comes to me and speaks to me about it, I can basically say, I recommend this company, this company, this company, probably not that company. I'm not going to name any names specifically here, but there are sort of companies and people who have respect. Now, they may not work with a new artist straight off the block. And I always wonder, with an artist that does want to employ one of these people, maybe they do have a slight budget. How do they find these people? Is it just word of mouth?
I mean, John may have something to say on this, as may as may Sandra, but I mean, my take on it is I think Sandra touched on this very early on, it really comes down to your network. And I think ultimately it's about building relationships with people. And I would start with, my personal take on this is start with other artists similar to you in the same city as you, one or two rungs up the ladder ahead of you. I'm not talking about trying to connect with people that are doing 5,000 cap venues in the same city as you, or, they're touring internationally. I'm talking about artists that are a few rungs up the ladder from you, maybe they're 18 months to 2 years ahead of you, and trying to build a relationship with them. It's almost thinking, as we come out of the pandemic, as things start to open up, who would you want to be supporting? Like, ideally, who would you want to be like doing a show within Manchester or doing a show within Birmingham, wherever you're based? And if you don't have that knowledge yet as to who that artist is, the question I always ask artists is, who is doing a similar thing to you in the same city as you, a little bit further ahead, 18 months, 2 years ahead of you? If you don't know the answer to that question, I would suggest there's a problem there. There's a disconnect, that you're not fully aware, you're not fully informed of the market. And when you become more fully informed of the market, it makes it much easier to answer those questions around, where do I find a playlist person? Where do I find a plugger? Who's a reputable music manager? Which booking agent should I look at? That's my take on it.
Yeah, very wise indeed. Sandra, would you recommend any particular companies for people to connect with or investigate that perhaps could put their music in front of playlisters and influencers and curators and so on?
Well, in my sort of like experience in this realm, it's basically around, we get a lot of our artists at CD Baby who get approached by what is third-party playlist curators. So those are like, the big playlists you see on Spotify that maybe are run by some mood or genre or blog or something like that, like an extension of what used to be the old blog days. And some of them, however, are like record labels, or seem like record labels that have multiple genre playlists, and they charge artists to be like, hey, for £100, you could submit to this one tool and it'll be considered for these 4 playlists. And each one of them might have 200,000 or 500,000 followers. And I always sort of caution people against doing that kind of thing in the playlist realm, just because pay to play is while it's common, you have to ask yourself about the quality of that audience that you're paying to reach, because, a lot of people tend to follow things that they are personally kind of invested in to speak to them. So people following a paid service are just going to get a bunch of people paying to be on that playlist or service. And I think that kind of dilutes the kind of discovery and curatorial element of where your music sits and how fans find your music. And I'm a big believer in that, just the network thing is really, really important, because even in terms of finding a PR or a radio plugger, those things are so genre dependent. You kind of ideally want to work with a PR that works with other bands in your genre of the same stature. A lot of people tend to look for PRs where they do a really big act that they really love, but if you're an emerging artist, that can be you could suddenly find yourself at the bottom of their pile. And also asking yourself honest questions about when is the right time to get PR and when is the right time to get radio plugging. That's often things like radio, it's not always the best to get it when you're an emerging artist. PR and radio plugging are both marketing endeavors that usually need to have a story connected to them, and that story is about your artist development, what you have to say, whether you're releasing an EP or an album. It's kind of a point to talk about. That's what press is based on. So
sure. And I think there are basically what we're coming to here is that there are a lot of snake oil salesmen out there, and you could be taken for a ride. You could spend a large sum of money and have absolutely no results. So try and build things from the grassroots up. Look at your local scene, try and connect with not only your friends but your friends' friends, and build your network from a grassroots perspective. John, I think you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I'll jump in, and it goes to also sort of being entrepreneurial, having a portfolio career, as it were. And I'll emphasize the network that Mike and Sandra brought up, and sort of bringing up old stories from from my background, some going way, way back. There's a reason why, Lemmy and Motorhead had the song "We Are the Road Crew." They all had been the road crew. Lemmy was Jimi Hendrix's.
Oh, are you frozen there? Ah, yes. Well, Lemmy was Jimi Hendrix's roadie. Unfortunately, John's just stuck in a time warp there. It's just, okay, we'll move on. I think he'll come back to us in a second. I hope so. G, tell us about Patreon, because I think this is one of the most important things to build a grassroots following and a network and pull people together and really kind of get the best out of your fans, not just financially, but also creatively. It seems like a really sort of mutually respectful platform. Tell us a bit about it and how it works.
Yeah, completely. And I think you're bang on with it being like a very emotionally supportive and platform. I think the way that we describe, well, at least I describe Patreon to a lot of people, is it's your biggest supporters. It is your safe space. It is Amanda Palmer actually just she's a Patreon creator, and she just had an article in American Songwriter where she described Patreon as her like financial and emotional bread and butter. It is this place which is full of the people who support you, who are most interested, the most engaged, which is a place for you to be honest and transparent and maybe share things you're working on, things that you're trying out. It's basically a membership for your biggest fans. And so I think it works best for artists kind of when you have already got some sort of fan base. It doesn't have to be huge. It just needs to be engaged. There needs to be generally, in getting down to the numbers of it, it's about 1 to 5% of your fans will convert into patrons. So you can kind of do the math there and work out like when it's worth it for you to invest in putting this extra content and community out there. But it's a very flexible platform, and the idea is really that it should be completely reflective of the creator behind it. So whether that creator is a musician, someone like Orla Gartland, for example, she has like an amazing concept. She calls it the Secret Demo Club, and every month she shares demos she's been writing songs since she was a teenager, so she's obviously got this huge archive of stuff that's never going to be released publicly, but for this small group of people who are supportive and excited about all of her work, she shares something with them monthly and a little bit of backstory. She'll be like, oh, I recorded this in my friend's apartment in New York, and I only had a guitar and I was trying to sound like Imogen Heap, and maybe that's not something she wants to put on Instagram and share with everyone, but it's something that like the really dedicated fans want to hear. It can also be totally outside of music. It could be Bat for Lashes. She does tarot readings with her patrons each month. The Tiga, the DJ, has like a hilarious tier, and he does podcasts, but he also does, he has one tier which is about £600 a month, and it's basically just the truth. Like you can just send him anything, your poetry, your music, advice in your relationship, and he's just going to tell you the truth. Like that's it. And so it's just this place for creators to have fun, for creators to connect with their audience, have ownership of that audience. You get all of their email addresses and you get their shipping addresses. Like we really strongly believe that creators should have ownerships of the audience that they've built. On a lot of platforms, you build this huge following, and if you want to go elsewhere, you lose them. They ultimately belong to the platform. Whereas for us, if you build an audience on Patreon, it's yours. So okay. I mean, that's a lot about Patreon.
yeah, no, that's great. That's what I asked you. Sandra, maybe you can tell me how artists that maybe are using CD Baby and services with you, how they also kind of link that or use their Patreon in a slightly different way, and how it kind of works best for the artists that you deal with.
For us, like the way we kind of like provide monetization services to artists is through our CD Baby platform, where we can offer things like publishing admin, things that might be difficult for independent artists to think about, think about collecting on their own. Publishing money is one of the more complicated things to collect, and for most artists really even to understand. So kind of signing up for a CD Baby Pro account, or and entering your Collection Society ID will be that will just be integrated into your account. And I think much more things like monetizing or actually delivering TikTok clips, and also like monetizing YouTube videos through the YouTube Partner Program and like Content ID monetization. Those are all like ways we help artists like collect revenue in the digital realm. And I think for stuff like Patreon, there's more in like the marketing advice we give artists in terms of how to connect with your fans and how to build a fan base, and kind of like sustainable strategies for like streaming, not just in your first week of release, but going onwards, and for your next release on.
Mm-hmm. Mike, how important is Patreon to the modern day artist, would you say, and platforms like that?
I think, again, as we sort of said throughout this, I think it's hard to give a one size fits all answer to these things because there isn't one, and again, that's just me being real with people. But, it ultimately depends on where you're at as an artist, how much music you've got out, how much content you want to make available to people. I'll go back to something that I just wanted to pick up on what G was saying about the idea of Patreon. All of the things that she was really outlining there are about giving about giving audiences an experience. Experiential marketing is the buzz phrase of the decade, really, and it's about offering an experience to your audience, and an experience is not just posting photos of you in the rehearsal room or you in the studio on Instagram. That isn't an experience. That's sort of passive content, or just ambient marketing. It's not kind of engaging stuff that people want to share or talk about at school or talk about to their friends or share. It's just kind of stuff that we see. I mean, and I'll just highlight that point by saying, what if any of us can think of this? I mean, I ask this to people all the time. What was the first thing you liked on Instagram this morning? I haven't got a clue what the first thing I liked on Instagram was this morning. So that's my point, is that kind of content isn't that experiential. So things like Patreon are really important, in my experience, in the mix of, sort of keeping your artist locked in and keeping them engaged. So yeah, sorry.
No, fair enough. Some excellently made points there. I mean, an artist I know quite well, Honeyblood, based up in Scotland, she, as like lots of artists, had a really tough pandemic, and her Patreon has been her saving grace. I mean, she's done loads of really interesting projects with her Patreon supporters and fans, but it's also kept her going financially. One thing she did recently is, and I think is continuing to do, is she asks her Patreon supporters to choose which songs that they would like her to cover, or some of her own songs that they would like her to record in a slightly different way. And then she does them, makes them specifically for them. They get them first, and then she's actually going on to release them to the wider world, or certainly some of those tracks, maybe not all of them, keeping certain things specific. The experience of those Patreon fans, they get it first, kind of thing. And it's fascinating. Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, I think it's really interesting because, I mean, we're just seeing Kanye West do this with Donda with his recent album, in the sense that the whole marketing process really has been this thing of like giving people an experience of hearing their music and then going away and furiously making changes before it actually hitting the DSPs, which is a very interesting way of doing things. I think as well, just to add to the sort of Patreon conversation as well, because I'm not affiliated with any one company, I think we have to shout out Bandcamp as well, because I think the work that Bandcamp have been doing over the lockdown as well has been vital for musicians. I think Bandcamp Friday is a fantastic idea, and I really hope that sticks around. And I think for anyone that doesn't know about Bandcamp, it's another great tool, another great independent platform where you can monetize your music, monetize your merch, and I think it's almost sometimes in my experience as an advisor, sort of like a really great platform to go from, okay, you've got your you've got your distributor, so maybe a CD Baby or a TuneCore or whoever it is, and then Bandcamp's quite a useful step then between then and Patreon. It's quite a useful middle step. So I think it's really important that people are aware of the work they're doing there as well.
Again, from my own perspective, my own band Check Masses, we stuck out a record, our debut album, in May 2020, right in the heart of the deep dark lockdown, and actually it's like a lot of artists, we got some streams on Spotify and so on and so on, but Bandcamp did really well for us. We sold tons of vinyl through it. We've built up a little community around it. We've actually sold downloads through it that we never thought we thought a few people would stream things, might buy the vinyl, but actually it's done really, really well for us. And we've recouped far more money through Bandcamp than we would ever have done through any of the streaming services. So big up. John, can you just kind of like jump in there? Do you use a Patreon, or do you have friends that use one? How does it work for you?
I mean, I know people who use Patreon. I don't use one myself, but I do think it's a very interesting way to engage with people, because you get, as everyone said here, a much more direct, much more immersive experience, which I think is particularly great through the pandemic, because the live experience was missing. You know, even if it's not a conversation with a performer, if you're in the same room as a performer, you feel a real connection. You know, there's the energy that goes back and forth between the audience and the artist. So Patreon is wonderful in that way. It's sort of less, you know, impersonal, of just kind of hearing a playlist off of a streaming service or something like that. One thing that I wanted to, before I completely exploded and disappeared, wanted to get back to, and Patreon does fit in this and some of the other things, building those networks. What I was saying in advance of my dropping off was, for example, there was a reason that Lemmy and Motorhead had the song "We Are the Road Crew," because they all had been the road crew. Lemmy was Jimi Hendrix's guitar tech. So this is the other aspect of sort of making money from music. You look for the other things that you can do, particularly now as live music may be coming back. But I think about various people like, so there's a guitar player, and this is sort of a niche area, but Tommy Victor, who I used to work with when he was a sound engineer at CBGB's. He also had his band Prong, and then went on to play guitar with Ministry, Glenn Danzig, and all of that. Well, Prong just had a built-in audience from all the other bands that Tommy mixed for at CBGB's. That's like, oh, Tommy's band's playing, you know, let's go see it. So you build out those sort of networks. I think about two bass players, Tracy
And then the
Wormworth
personal
and
network, yeah.
Sarah Lee, you know, who are both now, they switch off being the B-52's bass players, but both of them played with everybody. I mean, it was like kind of every third band in the 90s in New York had Sarah Lee playing in that band. You have other people, if you've got skills as a graphic designer, start doing that for bands. And then things, you know, it's just that whole network. So creating a scene. Now, the world's a bit different. So there are, you know, YouTube people, and you look at people like Paul Davids or Rick Beato, who now appear on each other's programs, you know, in each other's channels and things like that. And it builds up this network. And that's almost more important than, you know, yeah, paying one of these snake oil salesmen to get you on top of a, you know, on top of a playlist.
The network is
your book
king, I
about
think.
Fife, Vic, talks about that scene as well, and what happened with all the Fife bands who were playing with each other.
Yeah, all scenes, whether it be Manchester, Seattle, you know, as you say, Fence Records and Fife, or wherever it may be, it's all about that community. I want you, we've just sort of tapped into live. We don't want to talk about actual live, but live streaming, it's become obviously completely ubiquitous during the pandemic. It's taken on a complete life of its own. And to be honest, I don't think it's going anywhere for a while. We're hoping that live music's coming back bit by bit. It is coming back bit by bit, but I think live streaming is here to stay in one way, shape, or form. And I think it connects with all of these things that we're talking about. If you're making content and you're trying to monetize it, G, maybe you can tell us about, you know, some of the best ways to monetize, you know, a live streaming performance, and which are the best platforms to go through, and what's the best kind of technique to try and pull in an audience as well.
I mean, for sure. I mean, my experience is really with the creators who are using it on Patreon, and the way that they are often using it is to drive people. Of course, you can do like a one-off live stream, and that's perhaps like a great one-off experience. But what I see Patreon creators doing really well is using it as a tool to hook people in for a more longer term experience. So drive them to your page with a really special, for example, Charlie Simpson, who was in Busted and Fight Star, did this very well. He did a exclusive live stream show during lockdown. It was pre-recorded, like beautifully produced. And he said, if you come to my Patreon, you're going to see it there. That's the only place you're going to see it. And of course, it meant that the signups were brilliant right off the bat. Like immediately, as soon as he launched, all of his fans wanted to join that experience. And a lot of them stuck around beyond just that experience because they saw the additional content. So I think considering like how you will hold on to those audience members beyond just that event. I think also one thing that I've definitely seen, at the beginning, everyone was jumping on doing live streams on Instagram, and they were doing live streams on every platform. And one thing that I've seen shift is just like the amount of consideration that goes into the staging, the concept, the interaction with the audience. Like, how are we going to recreate that feeling as if you are actually at the gig? Because I think everyone was a little bit oversaturated with kind of just watching a stream. It was about creating like an immersive experience. So someone like, I mean, live streaming is not a live performance, but Ben Foltz, who's an artist, he does streams with his patrons where like he has an amazing vinyl collection, and basically he picks out a vinyl, he gets his patrons to pick a vinyl, and they drink whiskey and they just chat the whole way through, and it's like interactive and it's fun and it's intimate. So trying to think if there's some way of expressing your personality whilst doing these live streams.
Mike, what do you think is the best way to monetize and get money out of a stream, but also make it special?
Well, look, I mean, I think, I agree with what G said. I mean, a lot of people over the last 12 months have like obliterated sort of, Instagram and YouTube live functions, and to the point where it's sort of like somewhat devalue perhaps the process. But I do think there's something to be said, going back to the fact that some people watching this will be very much grassroots starting out. I wouldn't underestimate those platforms. Yes, of course, you're against an algorithm. Yes, of course, you're not always going to get the love that you will get through a platform where you're specifically talking to your paying members, where all of them are going to see it. If you've got 100 people that follow you on Instagram, you do an Instagram live, we might be at best reaching 10 people initially. And then depending on, where the algorithm takes you. So I think it's really important to remember that there are effectively free to use platforms for this kind of thing. And actually that might be where you cut your teeth originally or initially, just to see if you like the idea of talking to people over the internet, or performing to people or whatever it is. But I would definitely go back to the point G's made, which is it's about that experience again. So is the lighting any good? I mean, I'm just sat here with a lamp and an overhead light on, but at least it looks okay-ish. Like I'm not in such a dark kind of cupboard where, it might not be great if I'm sitting here with an instrument trying to talk to people, because you've got to think, people are scrolling past on a phone at a rapid pace. And if they're going to stop on Instagram and actually watch your live stream for more than 3 seconds, which would be a good result, statistically, then it's got to look great. So even if you are using free tools, make it look great. And at least, because I always go back to this point of, again, we're dealing with social platforms in which we're scrolling. So if it's going to catch anyone's attention, it needs to look as good as it possibly can do, because ultimately a lot of the time we see things now before we hear them. And that is absolutely pivotal to any kind of marketing conversation as well. People tend to see things now before they hear them. So does it look good?
Yeah, okay. So what we're getting is experience, a one-off, particular, personal, specific kind of experience of a high quality, and networks, building your networks. These are the two things I seem to be getting. I want to talk about a couple of other subjects, and then we're going to go to the questions in the chat box. Sandra, the importance of merch, whether it be through a Patreon, whether it be through a live stream on a different platform, whether it be through your Bandcamp or any other platform, eventually, whether it be at a live gig. We cannot underestimate vinyl, CDs, t-shirts, caps, underpants, whatever it is that you want to sell, right?
Yeah, I mean, merch is a very viable revenue stream for artists. And, even if it isn't for you at the moment, you should definitely aim to cultivate it you know, because people love buying merch. It's crazy how much people love buying merch. And you also can, like, you know, think outside of the traditional merch, which is what, like a t-shirt, a tote bag, and you know, like, think of like what it's just an opportunity for you to like represent your artist brand in another dimension, you know, like people love unusual graphics. People love, like, you know, who was it? It was like, I think we had an artist who was like giving away bottles of wine to encourage pre-saves. It's not exactly merch, but even like, you know, that's a little like kind of small gifts to your fans. Like,
that's bribery, isn't it?
It is kind of bribery, but you know, like we didn't hear any complaints from the fan side. And like, I think it's just important to, like, as your career develops, merch is a way for people to, like, you know, it's free advertising in a way. Like, you know, it's kind of a cool feeling when you like a band and you've been to a show and somewhere on the street you see someone with the same tote bag or t-shirt, you're like, that's cool. But yeah, I mean, I think you don't even have to be elaborate. You can think about, like, you know, there's so many merch companies at the moment where you can make like special pins. You know, I think pins are so in vogue right now. There's so many pin collectors, enamel pins, pin blogs, you know, just something simple like that. You don't have to think complex and expensive.
I was just going to jump in there, Vic, if you don't mind. Something that I always
it.
try and say to people as like a cheap item to produce, which I actually think tends to sell very well with upcoming artists, is taking the artwork from the single, the EP, the album, whatever it is, and doing an A3 or an A2 print. Like literally good quality paper. You can get them, run them off for maybe 70p to £1. You can definitely sell them for £5, £6. It's one of the best profit margins you're going to get on a cheap to produce piece of merch. So this idea that, you know, you have to have hundreds of pounds sitting around to do wholesale bulk buy, which also don't ever do that, because drop shipping is great, and I can touch on that in a minute. But you know, this idea of having to bulk buy stuff in this day and age is not really a thing. And sure, of course, margins might be a little cheaper if you were going to say, I'm going to do 100 posters and get them at 50p a piece instead of doing, I don't know, 20, where they might be more like £1. But the profit margin on posters is great. And also what I like about posters is the sorts of people that might buy a vinyl often would buy a print, because it's the same kind of thing. They put it on the shelf in their house. People come around, they say, oh, that's cool. What's that? It's a conversation starter. And that's why a lot of people buy vinyl these days. They're not always playing it. It's a piece of memorabilia. It's a moment. It's an experience that they have in the house. It's to show their identity. So prints are a great way of doing that, really cost effective, good profit margin.
And you just tapped into it there. Instead of bulk buying, bespoke orders, test the water, maybe with your Patreon, maybe with your Bandcamp, wherever it is. You sort of say, would you be up for us doing a run of mugs or a run of hats or a run of prints? And see roughly, well, 20 people said yes. Well, let's print up maybe 30 or 40 of them. We know we're going to get rid of 20 straight off the bat. We'll have the next 10 or 20 ready to sell to other people as the word goes round, or maybe just print those 20, right?
Yeah. Pre-order, pre-save, that kind of thing. Yeah, because then you don't make. Yeah.
Okay.
I was also
go for it.
I was also going to say, like, involve your fans in the process, like have them vote on which design, like they want to see, like what items. While She Sleeps are a great band to look at for merch because they do it all themselves. But they did a competition where their fans actually they showed their fans how they design their merch, and then their fans submitted their own versions of it, and then they actually printed the ones that they liked the best and sold them to their fans. Like, that kind of engagement like helps you test the water as well a little bit on, like, what do people actually want to buy, how many people are realistically engaged to the point that they're going to buy something, how much money should I invest. It's a good way to like involve them, basically.
Yeah. And also, because of the internet and phones and everything, it's quite pleasing if you do have things to sell on, for example, Bandcamp. You might just get a ping email and it's like, oh, someone's just bought our album. Oh, someone's just bought our t-shirt. So you get some kind of idea direct to your person. It's then up to you to put them in a cardboard envelope and send them off, obviously. Before we get to the questions, I just want one thing, and I think Mike, maybe you're main expert on this, but John, I think you might be able to jump in as well. Musicians who perhaps don't want to market themselves in these ways, don't want to sell merch, don't want to do, they're actual musicians, they're artists, they're extremely skilled musicians. Teaching, adult learning, transferring your skills to other people. That's a way that musicians can earn a living as well, and have another income stream coming in, right?
100%. Yeah. I mean, look, and again, it doesn't have to be teaching in the traditional sense. It doesn't have to be, you know, one-to-one in a little box room, as we often had that experience at school as musicians amongst us. It can be more fun. It can be online. It could be some kind of, Zoom session. Or again, I often say to people who've got skills that they might not always remember that they have, so it's like, oh, can you use Photoshop? Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, maybe you could do Photoshop lessons to someone who's, I don't know, a few years younger than you. And I think we made this point, and I think John had touched on it before, about this idea of people, using the same artwork people, or using the same whoever it is. And it's like, okay, what skills do you have? Are you good at video editing? Are you good at photo editing? Are you good at, like G was saying about literally creating art designs or merch designs or whatever it is. So I think this idea of teaching, whether it's in a strictly a one-to-one music lesson capacity, which definitely can help to generate revenue. And we have a lot of ISM members who do teaching work, and it's definitely a useful part of their income stream without a doubt. But equally, it might be teaching something else that you've just thought, hang on a sec, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Things are a bit sticky at the moment with regards to revenue streams and the traditional, types of work that we might be doing. But what else do I know? What else do I really, can I do an Ableton Live session? Can I do and just sort of build a little 4 or 5 lesson course? And, maybe even if it's a case of trying to market that in your local area rather than spending loads of money on online ads, it could be something that simple. But yeah, I agree that teaching is definitely a really useful revenue stream.
And are there sites or places where people can go to maybe sell their services, as it were? I'm brilliant at Ableton. I'm an excellent cello player. I want to, take my skills and transfer them to other people for a small price, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think when you've got kind of more like digital services, things like Fiverr are, a starting point, and there's Upwork, and there's a bunch of different third-party sites, again, none of which I'm affiliated with, just to be clear, but that exist in the marketplace that allow people to offer their services or their skills. I do think to an extent, though, there's something to be said about, in the pandemic, particularly about looking a little bit more localized and actually looking at people in your local area, in your village or town, maybe your city, and even to a degree putting up posters or putting flyers through people's doors and that kind of thing, because you might just catch someone's attention with a flyer. Even, I'm not saying it has to be full gloss, 6 colors. It could just be a black and white thing that you've printed out on your printer at home, just saying, I'm offering a 5-part course in Photoshop, or I'm offering one-to-one violin lessons. I think that door-to-door marketing with things like teaching is still actually a very useful thing, because there's so many people, again, online that have got bigger budgets, bigger production budgets for making those ads look amazing, that actually sometimes that really just like door-to-door type localized marketing can be really useful when it comes to teaching work.
And do you need training to become a teacher or anything like that? I mean, is it something that you can just do without having officially trained?
I mean, look, I've done a lot of work in the education space over the years, and I can say that when I came into a higher education environment originally, when I was actually doing work within a sort of a university environment, I had no formal training. I just had a lot of industry experience, and from that, they were happy to give me some training and some pointers and some observations and some feedback. I think if you're doing one-to-one training, you don't necessarily need to have a formal teaching qualification, a PGCE or something like that. I think definitely it will help the quality of the teaching and the learning as well going on in that environment, that learning environment. But yeah, I mean, what I would suggest in regard to that is probably, if anyone watching this would like more information about that, is probably to contact the ISM, because we can give you more information about what might be useful to know, or what courses might be useful to look at in that capacity.
Great. Okay, I'm going to cut to some questions.
We've got
absolutely tons. Oh, sorry, John, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say as well, there are other aspects of sort of non-traditional teaching. I brought up earlier Rick Beato, who has a great series on YouTube about what makes this song great, and he just picks it apart track by track and gives demos and things like that. So that's not so much like, here's how you play Smoke on the Water, or something like that. It's, he's really good and really engaging in doing that. So figure out, look at some of the things that you've been successful with that maybe other people would be interested in, what you can talk about, things like that. do reviews of gear, talk about how you do your working process in creating things. Or there's the other aspect is you could be somebody like, Todd Rundgren's keyboardist Roger Powell, who actually is one of the major software developers of music software out there. Do you have a skill as a programmer? Do you have skills that are tangentially related to creativity or music? And how can you bring them more in line with what you're doing?
Yeah, well, this goes into the initial comment right at the beginning of this session, which is about a portfolio career. You might have some money from merch, you might have some money from streaming, you may be getting some money from your Patreon, you may be playing some live shows, you might be doing a bit of teaching. I mean, it all comes together and it hopefully earns you a living. I mean, in my own way, I'm a freelancer. I do all sorts of stuff. I do some BBC shows, but I also host podcasts. I host live events. I do things on Zoom. I have to pull all sorts of different things together to earn a living. And that's the way of the modern world. Let's get to some of these questions because we're kind of over the hour already. Remember, we just get 5 or 6 minutes worth of questions. So there's lots about Patreon. We'll come to those in a second. Brian MC says, I'm interested in Sandra's view that it's never been as good for artists. It would appear not, given Parliament's view on fair streaming incomes being distributed to artists. Sandra, what do you say to that?
I think that is one element of the whole picture, but I think overall, in terms of the access that independent artists have to like distribute their own music without, compared to the past when you had to be signed to a label and, the label handled all that. I think there's a lot of avenues now where, artists can access the same services, if not more than, like kind of artists signed to a label or passing through like a major indie system. So in that respect, yeah, I think it's much more, you have way more tools that you can control that's outside of like the traditional gatekeepers and ways to reach your audience directly that, I think weren't even around like 5 or 10 years ago. So in that way, I think there is like more of a chance for you, like as an independent artist, to reach people. But, obviously there's like so many elements to the story, including streaming, which, is an issue facing artists of all stature in terms of how they get paid and who listens to their music and, and how they can hope to be fairly compensated. So, yeah, I definitely agree with that sentiment for sure. There's things to look at, but yeah, I think when you look at the whole picture, you'll see a lot of positives as well.
Okay. Staying with you, Sandra, for another quick one. Anonymous attendee has asked, can I monetize my music on TikTok and is it worth investing my time in?
I think that is also so artist dependent. It's quite difficult to give us, but I think the general answer is yes. But TikTok works differently from what you would expect, like say a music platform like Spotify, Apple Music, or Amazon to work like, and in the way that there is a strong element of it's not strictly about your music and TikTok, it's about the video that accompanies it. But there are many tricks that we see our artists do. Like one of them is just doing like a lip sync video. If you have a single, I think TikTok is all about authenticity. So people respond to content that feels authentic to them and make replies, like, reply videos. And that's how music finds its way around the TikTok ecosystem. It's difficult to just be like, hey, I have a track and now I want it to go viral on TikTok. It just depends on your audience already. And it's quite hard to do that if you don't have an audience already. But if you're a TikTok user and you've built that account, when you finally have music, I think it's quite easy to put it out to your followers.
Okay. Interesting. Right, we'll get to some Patreon questions. G, this is for you. Ron Carey says, how do you become a creator on Patreon? That's the first easy question, surely?
Sure. You can go to www.patreon.com/create. And that will just prompt you to set up a profile, and you can play around with it as much as you like behind the scenes with like adding pictures and membership benefits and tiers. It all remains private until you press launch. So it's simple to get started. We have like packages that are tailored towards like podcasters and musicians, or you can just go completely bespoke and add in your own tiers and benefits. And I also really highly recommend having a little look at the blog, and there's a lot of resources from other creators there who can share how they've got started on the platform. But yeah, it's hopefully quite simple to get going. And do reach out if you ever have any questions.
Another one from anonymous attendee says, can classical artists use Patreon?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Patreon is really open to all kinds of creators, and I think what's great about it is that it's flexible. There's a lot of room to grow. So if you are wanting to experiment with different mediums, or if you want to stick to music, you want to do teaching as well. We have a huge amount of people who, especially during the pandemic, used it as a platform for basically doing tutorials. So a very scalable way of teaching a lot of people at once. Yes, it's totally set up for all kinds of creators.
And one more Patreon question, and then we'll try some others. Laura Hanker says, at what point would you start doing exclusive stuff for your fans after releasing music as part of a marketing plan, etc.? When's the best time?
Yeah, I think it's always a good idea to have it tied to some project. So if you feel like when you're releasing music, you have lots of extra content, perhaps demos, early versions, you want to do listening parties, like that could be a good moment to do it. But there's no real like one size fits all. I feel like and I'm sorry to not give you a hard and fast. I mean, the most important thing I would say is like, look at your audience. Do you have these super fans? Like, do you have people who are reinvested in what you're doing? If your answer is not sure, maybe kind of consider how you can build that connection with your audience, and then look at something like Patreon. The idea with Patreon is not to like take up a huge amount of your time. It really should free you up to focus on your creative pursuits. But of course, it does take some time. So you want to make a calculation of like, is this the moment? Like, are there people who are going to join? And like, ask your audience as well. You know, say to them, I'm thinking about doing Patreon. I've got these ideas of the kind of content I'd like to share. What's exciting for you to see on there? Give them a sense of ownership over that process as well, and it'll be a good way for you to kind of like test the waters and see what the appetite's like. But yeah, no, there'll be a moment where you have to do a cost benefit analysis and be like, is it worth the time to create the extra content for the amount of people who I think are likely to join? Remember that 1 to 5% conversion.
Well,
let me jump in 1 second to give a little Delic plug. We have a partnership with Patreon, and if you're a Delic member, you get a special onboarding experience. So sign up for Delic and check out our resources page, and it'll connect you to that.
Quite right too, John. Plug away. It is a Delic session after all. Right, here's quite an interesting one. I'll point this one towards you, Mike. David Smith says, question around cover versions. A lot of new artists appear to have used a cover version of a very popular song, but do it in their own unique style to gain some traction. If you're not looking for any financial gain per se from the actual recording, are you allowed to publish that cover on socials in order to attract people to your own music? Thanks.
The short answer is it's entirely dependent on whether the platform you're putting the music on is licensed for that. So in the case of YouTube, YouTube has licenses in place with various third parties, and they're normally the music publishers. So what's important to remember there is the person that owns the underlying song in your new recording. So if you've done a Beatles song, whoever owns, or Sony owned the Lennon-McCartney catalog. So, you know, Sony have a relationship with YouTube, which permits those covers to be monetized and to be used on those platforms. So the short answer is yes, you can, providing the platform is licensed correctly with the relevant publishers. All the major publishing companies have licenses in place with the majority of platforms, certainly the social media platforms. I always get this question about Zoom, and Zoom is not a licensed platform, just to make people aware of. Although I think it's fairly unlikely that you run into any issues if you were just, you know, I don't know, playing a 10-second clip of music to people. But to be clear, that isn't a licensed platform, so you could run into copyright infringement related problems there. But yes, I mean, as you'll have seen, there are covers on Spotify of big artists. As long as the mechanical royalties are being paid back to the publishers that own the songs, there shouldn't be an issue. There are some things to be aware of, however. If you submit your music through CD Baby, TuneCore, whoever it is you're using as a distributor, I strongly advise that you ensure that the relevant and correct publishing information is sent to the DSP. I can see Sandra furiously nodding as well, which is great.
Yes.
But if you try and submit music to a DSP, to Spotify, to Apple Music, and somewhat pass it off as your own, even though it's a Lennon-McCartney song or it's somebody else's song, you're going to run into problems, and most likely you're going to get a takedown notice, which will mean that the track is taken down because you tried to pass that composition off as your own. So it's very important to try and have the publisher information and the songwriter information to submit that music through your distribution service, whoever that is, to try and minimize that possibility.
Okay, I'm just going to take another quick one from David Smith again. He says, question around release schedule. How frequently should you try and release music for sale these days to strike a balance between new material and too much material? Sandra?
Well, I think the more that artists release, the better chance they have of building up their Spotify or DSP profiles, just because of like, the algorithm senses like a new release and there's higher engagement with that artist. I don't really think there's like a question of too much or like, like there isn't really a threshold for me. I think artists who release frequently see different results and different audiences from artists that maybe have one release every 2 years. And I think that kind of feeds into what we've been talking about this whole session about like, how to engage your fans or give your fans something new to talk about or to, engage with. And the more often you release music, the more, chance like, all DSPs have recommendation algorithms depending on the DSP, and it tends to like, pick up things that people are engaging with more. So like the more frequently you release music, the more people who follow you on Spotify will engage with it or get it served to them in their algorithmic playlists, like Release Radar and Discover Weekly. So that can only be a good thing. I don't know when the threshold is when it feels like too much, basically.
Okay.
So.
That's good to know. Because you can overplay a town, you can overdo certain things, but actually with DSPs and digital, and sort of streaming platforms, perhaps, quantity is the thing. It's, as much as you want to release it, that's, it's up to you really. Colin Boston has got in touch. He says, do you think there's a taboo towards artists who sell their art for money? If so, what would change an artist or manager's mind that it isn't distasteful? I'll put that one to John. What do you think? Is there a taboo towards artists who sell their art for money?
You got to put food on the table.
Yeah,
you really do. I know there has been, some people think it's a problem. I honestly don't see why it is. Are you a professional musician? It's if you personally don't like it, then give it away for free. No one is forcing you to sell. But if you want to support yourself as an artist, you have to find some way of doing that.
Yeah. That's a concise and perfect answer, I think. Give it away if you don't want to sell it. I think maybe 2 more questions and then we should bow out. Helena Rishi has been in touch a couple of times. She says, would you have any recommendation for trustworthy merchandising companies for emerging artists, so small orders? Thank you. This discussion was really helpful. Helena, anyone got any ideas of trustworthy merchandising companies? A couple of Delic sessions ago, we had Terrible involved. Despite their name Terrible, they're an excellent company. So there's one straight off the bat. Any other recommendations, Sandra, Mike, G?
My take on it would be look local, look at who is on your doorstep. You might find there's a t-shirt printer that's in the same town as you that actually will do you a really good rate. And it may be cheaper. There might not be shipping costs, might not be like extreme VAT costs or whatever the extra costs are that tend to get lumped on things. I'm usually based in Manchester. There's again, without plugging them specifically, because it's sort of not relevant to the conversation, but there's a printer that I often recommend that people use in Manchester that I've just kind of come to know through word of mouth. I believe he's sole trader, small business, doesn't charge people that. So again, most people tend to make a 20% saving by using that individual. They've got various different t-shirt weights and qualities and that kind of thing. But, I think my take on it is probably initially, yes, you could Google, have a look around, but there is, by the sounds of it, Terrible merch, awesome merch. There's a bunch of different companies that do this kind of thing, but fundamentally, they are fulfillment companies, and they're just, a company often with the right printing equipment and the wholesale stock to do your order. And sometimes they're very competitive price-wise. Sometimes you may find that somebody more local to you will do you a better rate. So I think shop around.
Okay, good. Yeah. I think we should probably end it with one final question, and let me find it again. Talia Owens has been in touch. She says, hey, I'm really loving this. I'm a popular music student in my final year and thinking about where I go from here. Should I be thinking about a portfolio career now, or should I just focus on getting an audience? Let's have everyone's opinion on that. Sandra.
I mean, I think it comes down to like what, like, you know, whether you're ready to like sell your music or if you're at what stage of your career you're at. But yeah, I'm always an advocate of finding an audience because, you know, that's something you really kind of start building from day one. And then from then on, you can plan all these branch off activities like selling merch to them or live streaming to them. But, you know, when you don't have that audience, it's harder to, you know, think about that in the future.
Okay. G, I see you nodding there. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I would just totally agree with the what Sandra was saying about building an audience, but also I would say like use this time to experiment. Like it's such an exciting time in your career. Like try and pursue different avenues and see what feels right to you, rather than, I think the biggest learning I've had throughout my career is that if I tried to plan this, it never would have worked out the way it did. So follow the opportunities as and when they come. That would be my biggest piece of advice.
Yep. Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo what both Sandra and G have said. I mean, I think G raises a really good point, is don't be afraid to experiment at this time. I speak to so many young artists who get so stuck on this idea of the product has to be right before it goes to market. And I think generally, yes, it should be 80%, but there's always room for improvement. There's always room for stylistic change. There's always room for different mix down quality or mastering qualities or whatever it is. And sometimes you just got to start somewhere. And my career was very much that. When I was a musician, I had great creative ideas, I think. So people seem to think, but the mix downs weren't great. The mastering wasn't great, but that stuff improved over time. So I think it's sort of a shared what everyone said thus far. I think it's entirely dependent on your financial situation, what you do at this stage in your life. And without knowing that, it's hard to be specific. But by and large, I would lean on if you're in a position where, you know, you can financially work on the music, get the creative product out there and build an audience, I would generally steer towards that as well.
Yeah. And finally, John, portfolio career or focus on one specific thing first? What do you think?
Portfolio career, because that's actually the only way you're going to have longevity.
Right.
If you want to stay in the music business, you know, you need to have multiple things that you can do. You know, otherwise you'll have to leave the music business at some point.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
These are all words of wisdom from everyone, and we have gone about 17 minutes over our allotted time space. It tends to happen with these ISMxDelic sessions. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. That is it from us today and from this particular series. Thank you very much to Sandra, G, Mike, and John. I hope you've enjoyed the session, the chat. I'm sorry we haven't got back to absolutely every question in the Q&A and chat boxes, but you can contact us directly and people will message you back and so on and so on. And hopefully you've got something inspirational from this. I'll hand you back briefly to Maria at the ISM Trust. I'm sorry I've gone this kind of weird blue color. I'm Vic Galloway. Thank you very much for watching. Cheers, folks.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you everyone for an engaging discussion. Thank you all for attending and tuning in this afternoon. The webinar will be available on the ISM's Trust website from next week, as well as on the Delic website. You can find our webinar library following the link in the chat, and if you're interested in our work or the ISM membership, you can find more details on ism.org. Lastly, as I said, and as everyone mentioned, thank you again for attending, and we hope to see you at another ISM Trust webinar soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks.